Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's unilaterally ended the Gaza ceasefire, launching a massive wave of airstrikes overnight that killed at least 404 people and wounded more than 560 others, numbers that are expected to rise with scores of victims still trapped in the rubble. The attacks began without warning, though earlier today Israel's military warned residents in several Gaza border regions to evacuate immediately after declaring their neighborhoods to be dangerous combat zones. Survivors of the assault said entire families were wiped out, with children and the elderly among the dead.
Almost the entire family was martyred, all of them in pieces, and our house collapsed on us. Our house is directly next to theirs. There are also injuries at the Satari house. They're still pulling people out from under the rubble. We were sleeping just before suhoor, breakfast, and the house almost fell on us.
The White House said Israel gave the U.S. advance warning about the renewed assault on Gaza. Even before the airstrikes, Palestinians were suffering from more than 2 weeks of an Israeli-imposed blockade on all fuel and humanitarian aid into Gaza. On Sunday, UNICEF reported a third of young children in northern Gaza are suffering from acute malnutrition, adding, quote, 1 million children are living without the very basics they need to survive yet again, they said. After headlines, we'll get the latest from Gaza. Israeli prosecutors agreed to cancel a planned hearing today in Prime Minister Netanyahu's corruption trial due to Israel's renewed assault on Gaza. Netanyahu had been scheduled to testify. On Sunday, he said he would remove Israel's top domestic intelligence official, head of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar. Shin Bet has been investigating 2 of Netanyahu's advisors over document leaks and ties with Qatar. The news set off protests in Israel, with more planned this week.
It's going to harm the negotiation to release all the hostages. I think Bibi doesn't want to release all the hostages, because when he released all the hostages and he had declared at the end of the war, that's the end of his political situation.
On Friday, the Associated Press reported Israeli and U.S. officials claimed to have contacted counterparts in Sudan, Somalia, and Somaliland to discuss taking in expelled Palestinians from Gaza. According to the Associated Press, Sudan has rejected the idea, while Somalia and Somaliland say they are not aware of any such contacts. President Trump has repeatedly called for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The UN's Human Rights Office says Israel has significantly expanded and consolidated illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank in violation of international law. In a statement, UN High Commissioner Volker Turk said, quote, the transfer by Israel of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies amounts to a war crime. His comments came amidst a wave of attacks by Israeli settlers on Palestinian communities in the West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. Last week, settlers attacked the village of Kirbet al-Majam, firing live ammunition and throwing tear gas bombs as they set fire to cars and 3 Palestinian homes.
Abu Muhammad closed the door, and then they climbed on top of the house and started to throw stones. They broke the door and the windows. Then they burnt this door and entered and set fire inside the house. We went in to take the children out of the house. We didn't find the children. They took the children with them. When they saw us, they left the children.
In Yemen, UNICEF has confirmed at least 2 children were killed in U.S. strikes after U.S. forces launched a large-scale military operation against the Houthis. The UN agency's findings directly contradict this claim by a Pentagon spokesperson.
The civilian casualty side, no indications of any civilian casualties. We, of course, have seen some of the accusations by the Houthis. We look at those closely when they do come in, but we have no credible indications of any civilian casualties.
The Pentagon called the military operation against the Houthis open-ended and said attacks will continue, quote, until we achieve the president's objectives, unquote. On Monday, tens of thousands of people rallied in Yemen's Houthi-controlled capital Sana'a to protest the U.S. strikes, which have reportedly killed dozens of civilians. Meanwhile, the Houthis have claimed another attack on a U.S. naval vessel in retaliation for U.S. strikes on Yemen. The Houthis said last week the group would resume targeting Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea due to Israel's ongoing blockade and now war on Gaza. President Trump has threatened the United States will hold Iran responsible for any further retaliatory attacks from the Houthis, saying on social media Tehran would, quote, suffer the consequences, unquote. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Iran's ambassador to the U.S. expressed his, quote, deep concern and strong condemnation of Trump's remarks. Lebanon and Syria have agreed to a ceasefire after a cross-border skirmish escalated into 2 days of fighting that Lebanon's health ministry says killed 7 civilians, including a 4-year-old girl. Syria's interim government accused Hezbollah of starting the fighting by abducting and killing 3 Syrian soldiers. Hezbollah denies the claim. Separately, Syria's state news service reports 3 people were killed and 19 wounded Monday night. Launched airstrikes on the southern province of Daraa. The strikes targeted a military site previously used by the Assad regime, but now under the control of Syria's interim government. In Washington, D.C., a federal judge heard arguments from a Justice Department lawyer Monday after the Trump administration defied the judge's order Saturday to turn around 2 Salvador-bound deportation flights carrying Venezuelan nationals and to ground a 3rd plane that took off after the order was issued. During a contentious exchange, the Justice Department attorney repeatedly refused to answer many of Judge James Boasberg's questions, claiming he was not authorized to do so. The case was brought by the American Civil Liberties Union. Speaking after Monday's hearing, ACLU lawyer Lee Gelernt called the situation a constitutional crisis.
At this point, it seems like the administration is simply walking into court and telling a federal court they can't look at the evidence, they can't stop what they're doing, and we see constant public statements from administration officials criticizing federal judges, saying they don't have authority. I think we're on dangerous ground here in the United States.
To see our interview with Lee Gelernt, go to democracynow.org. Judge Boasberg set a deadline of noon today for the Justice Department to provide more information on the deportation flights, including how many people it believes are covered by the Alien Enemies Act of 1789, which the Trump administration invoked to justify the deportations. The Justice Department is now attempting to remove Judge Boasberg from the case altogether. Trump's so-called border czar, Tom Homan, told Fox News the judge does not have authority over the planes because they were over international waters when his written order was issued. Homan added, quote, I don't care what the judges think. Meanwhile, White House aide Stephen Miller appeared on CNN falsely asserting the Trump administration has the right to violate court orders it disagrees with.
What we are expecting is the Supreme Court to say what has always been the case, which is when the president is using his powers as commander-in-chief, those determinations are not subject to judicial review. How are you going to expel illegal alien invaders from our country who are raping little girls, who are murdering little girls, if each and every deportation has to be adjudicated in a district court judge? That means you have no country, it means you have no sovereignty, it means you have no future.
The Department of Homeland Security said Monday it had detained and deported Brown University professor Dr. Rasha Alawiya, despite a judge's order that she was not to be removed from the United States. Her lawyers argued the federal government willfully disobeyed the court order. DHS said it deported Alawiya because she attended the funeral of slain Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah during a February trip back home to Lebanon. The funeral was a major event in Beirut, attended by hundreds of thousands of people. The deportation over the weekend triggered major uproar, including in the medical community. Dr. Alawiya is a transplant nephrologist, a highly specialized surgeon in critical need, and associate professor at Brown University. The Environmental Protection Agency is planning to eliminate its Scientific Research and Development Office, firing as many as 1,155 chemists, biologists, toxicologists, and other scientists. That's according to documents reviewed by Democrats on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has said he wants to cut 65% of EPA's budget as part of mass layoffs. In Houston, Texas, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Johnson Space Center Monday Monday for a union-led rally to oppose mass firings and layoffs imposed on NASA by Elon Musk and his Doge operation. Ars Technica reports Trump's considering cuts of up to 50% of NASA's science budget, a prospect described by the Planetary Society as, quote, nothing short of an extinction-level event for space science, unquote. Meanwhile, Doge staffers flanked by D.C. police officers forced their way into the U.S. Institute of Peace on Monday after a standoff with senior employees. The Institute's CEO, former U.S. Ambassador to Senegal, George Moose, who was fired on Friday, condemned the move as an illegal takeover of a nonprofit group.
We have been talking to them for many weeks now, and in anticipation of just this possibility, and also to remind them that we are a private, non-profit corporation in the District of Columbia, and therefore not a federal agency, and therefore the federal government has no entitlement to come in and take over our building.
The entire board of the U.S. Institute of Peace was also removed, except for Trump's newly appointed members, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and National Defense University President Peter Garvin. President Trump says he's ready to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin today about his proposed 30-day ceasefire deal for Ukraine. Ahead of the conversation, Trump said negotiators are looking at, quote, dividing up certain assets, unquote. That's likely to include pressing Ukraine to accept Moscow's claims over Russian-occupied territory and control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which Russia has occupied since 2022. Russia's also demanding guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly said Russia must surrender all of the territory it has seized. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Rwanda-backed M23 armed group announced Monday it'll no longer participate in peace talks scheduled for today in Angola's capital. M23's reversal came as the group objected to European Union sanctions imposed on its leaders, as well as several Rwandan military officers over gross human rights abuses committed during M23's offensive in eastern DRC, which has killed over 7,000 people since January. In Texas, a midwife has been arrested for providing abortions, marking the first time a provider faces criminal charges under the state's near-total abortion ban. Maria Margarita Rojas owned and operated a network of health clinics in the Houston suburbs. One of her employees, Jose Ley, was also charged. Both are also being accused of practicing without a medical license. The abortion charge is a second-degree felony in Texas and punishable by up to 20 years in prison. President Trump Monday toured the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and attended his first board meeting since installing himself as chair. Trump criticized the renowned venue, saying it was in, quote, tremendous disrepair, as is a lot of the rest of our country, most of it because of bad management, Trump said. Last month, Trump led a complete overhaul of the Kennedy Center, replacing all Democratic appointees to the board with his own political allies, donors, and their wives, including Second Lady Usha Vance. A growing number of artists have refused to perform there or use their appearances to protest the Trump administration. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast with two musicians who performed last week and held up banners in protest. And the documentary Armed Only with a Camera, The Life and Death of Brent Renaud, which premiered last week at the South by Southwest Film Festival in Austin, Texas, has received the festival's Audience Award in the documentary short competition. Directed by Craig Renaud, the film tells the story of his brother Brent Renaud, the first Western journalist killed by Russian soldiers during the first weeks of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He was killed on March 13, 2022. Brent received a posthumous director's credit for the film as well. It was produced by Downtown Community Television and HBO. To see our interviews with the Renaud brothers, with Craig and Brent over the years, go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.